The self we cherish is often built upon structures we never questioned, habits that settled into the shape of convenience rather than conviction. We tell ourselves who we are by repeating what others expect us to repeat, a careful negotiation between authenticity and belonging. The greatest difficulty lies not in knowing who you want to be, but understanding how entirely fluent the life you live is at mimicking the expectations placed upon you. If becoming requires constant revision of self, then where does the raw material for that change come from? Is it a sudden burst of will, or something slower, more foundational? We assume that transformation is an act of radical choice, a singular decision to switch gears. But what if being who we want to be is not a destination reached by force, but a continuous process of disciplined forgetting? The true art is accepting the perpetual incompleteness of self-authorship. It resides in the persistent effort itself. To understand this discipline, we must look first at Aristotle. He taught that virtue, or excellence, is not an innate gift nor a sudden insight. It is a habit. We become just by performing just acts. We become temperate by exercising restraint. For Aristotle, character is fundamentally practical. It accumulates through repetition, like muscle memory. The self is thus something built from the mundane scaffolding of daily choices. The tendency to choose courage in small moments builds the structure of a courageous person. He offered a clear architecture for becoming, one rooted entirely in observable action and consistent practice. If you want to be thoughtful, you must spend your days thinking deeply about everything. But this model often feels too neat, too accommodating to social order. It assumes a definable good, or a stable community standard against which we can measure our failures. The deep work of becoming demands more than merely fitting into an established excellence. It sometimes requires the shattering of the existing template entirely. This is where the philosophy shifts from habituation to will, toward Nietzsche. He argued that existence is not about achieving some perfect, preordained virtue, but about overcoming oneself, a demanding process he called self-overcoming. The goal is not harmony with convention, but the creation of value through sheer force of affirmation. Becoming becomes a lonely act of declaring one's own meaning, in opposition to what has always been true. It demands perpetual suspicion of comfort, and often requires suffering as the forge for new strength. The tension between these two ideas, the accumulated habit of virtue versus the radical will of self-overcoming, is where genuine transformation lives. The mistake is thinking that one must choose either discipline or rebellion. True agency requires synthesizing both. It means finding the personal, rigorous habits, Aristotle, that are themselves rebellious acts against inherited norms, Nietzsche. It means establishing a private philosophy of effort, recognizing that the scaffolding you build for yourself, the commitment to reading difficult books, the habit of speaking slowly and clearly, the routine of deep work, is simultaneously an act of supreme discipline and radical self-legislation. We are authors, yes, but we must first become meticulous editors of our own internal life. The paradox is that the purest, most authentic acts of becoming are often those performed in silence, away from witness. When we believe change requires a dramatic public declaration, a manifesto, a grand gesture, we mistake the performance for the reality. The quiet accumulation of small, difficult choices holds far more weight than any singular, defiant moment. This internal ledger is where the true work takes place. It requires accepting that you will always fail to achieve the final form. The self is designed not for stasis, but for perpetual revision. The self we cherish is often built upon structures we never questioned, habits that settled into the shape of convenience rather than conviction. We tell ourselves who we are by repeating what others expect us to repeat, a careful negotiation between authenticity and belonging. The greatest difficulty lies not in knowing who you want to be, but understanding how entirely fluent the life you live is at mimicking the expectations placed upon you. The real work, then, is not about crafting an immaculate blueprint for a future self. It's about developing radical awareness, the ability to notice the invisible scripts running in the background of your life. To truly begin becoming requires accepting that comfort is the enemy of definition. We are conditioned to seek stability, yet stasis is merely calcified movement. True growth demands the friction of discomfort, the awkwardness of admitting you do not know the answer. This means making the conscious choice to be inefficiently authentic at times, to speak a truth that feels too raw, to pursue a passion that seems impractical, or to simply sit with the profound emptiness of indecision without panicking. We must treat our identity less like a finished statue and more like an ongoing geological process, slow, violent, messy, and deeply patterned by pressure. The self is not found in grand epiphanies. It lives in the mundane choices made when no one is watching, the habit of pausing before reacting, the deliberate act of saying no or spending time with a concept rather than an outcome. This shift requires cultivating a profound internal accountability, recognizing that external validation will always be contingent and insufficient. If you think back to the beginning, to the moment we first spoke about perpetual revision, remember that feeling of intellectual vertigo, the dizzying sense that everything you thought was solid ground might actually be sand. That sensation is not failure. It is simply the necessary precursor to elevation. The becoming is inherently destabilizing because stability implies arrival, and arriving means stopping. And if we stop, we lose the beautiful, frightening engine of perpetual revision. So, perhaps the art isn't in achieving a perfect self, but in mastering the act of continuous surrender, surrendering the need for definition, surrendering certainty, and finally, surrendering to the sheer force of forward motion. The goal is not perfection, but participation. It is simply showing up, day after day, willing to be slightly wrong, slightly unfinished, and profoundly human.